Hello, and thank you for attending SAGE Alerts and Workflow video-based training. Please note that this is video-based training, and content is for training purposes only and intended for new and existing SAGE Alerts and Workflow customers.
Hi, my name is Jane Nichols, and today I am going to give an introduction to query design in the Alerts and Automation solution. A query determines whether specific conditions exist within an application's database. An event uses one or more queries, and if the conditions of its queries are met, the event is triggered, and the resulting alerts, reports, and workflow actions are executed. Most events use a single query. Some events use multiple queries, especially events whose triggering is based on a combination of conditions that exist across multiple application databases. There are three types of queries. The first is a record-level query, which checks for records that meet certain conditions. For example, invoices that are overdue for payment, or stock that is approaching its reorder level, or sales quotes that expire in 3 days. The second is an aggregate query that checks to see if a group of records collectively meet a certain condition. For example, a total of past due invoices for a single client that exceeds $10,000, or a count of more than 3 late deliveries from a supplier over the last 6 months, or an average value of open quotes that is less than $5,000. The third is a field-level change query. It checks to see if one or more fields have had their value changed. For example, customers whose credit status has changed, or a support call whose priority has changed to urgent, or an inventory item whose list price has changed. There are 6 items to consider in preparation for designing a query. The first is to determine the purpose of the query. Query design is easier if you begin by identifying the event conditions that you wish to monitor. A query serves 2 purposes. First, it identifies what conditions must be met for an event to be triggered, and second, it identifies which database fields may be used within the event's alert messages and workflow. An event uses database fields as content for its alert messages, to contain an alert recipient's delivery address, as selection criteria to be passed into a Crystal or SSRS report, or as content for an event's workflow actions, such as data to be written into an application's database. The second item is to determine what the alert looks like. Will it be a text message or an email? Or will it generate and deliver forms, documents, reports, or execute workflow actions, such as updating applications, calling web services, and so on? The third item is to identify the application tables from where the data will come from. It is important to be familiar with the database schema of the application that the solution will be used to monitor. The fourth item is to identify the data fields that should be in the alert, such as customer name, due dates, items, etc., depending on what the purpose of your query is. Note that if the recipient of the alert comes from a record, then the query must include the fields that contain that information, such as a sales rep name and a sales rep email address. The fifth item is to identify the conditions to check for that triggers the event. For example, if an order acknowledgement is to be sent to the customer when an order is entered, the conditions to check for would be a new customer order that has an entered date of today. And finally, the last item is to identify the alert recipients. Remember, if the recipient of the alert comes from the record, then the query must include the fields that contain that information, such as the sales rep name and the sales rep email address, as mentioned earlier. This concludes the query design introduction. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you for attending SAGE Alerts and Workflow video-based training.